So we spoke last week about the James DeGale and Lee Selby bill on the BT Sports side. At the time of announcement, it was confirmed that Anthony Yarde and Daniel Dubois would be on the undercard. Both of those guys have had their opponents been confirmed now for the fight in December. Anthony Yarde will take on Sjekloca. We might throw in a minute or two on that fight towards the end of this video, if there's time spare. Daniel Dubois will take on Dorian Darch. So I wanted to talk more about that fight in this particular video. Number one, always a fan of heavyweight boxing on this channel. And number two, Daniel Dubois has been a person who's been getting a lot of coverage this week. You know, Frank Warren's come out and made some real big statements about Daniel Dubois. I think he said he's the most exciting heavyweight prospect he's ever been involved with, or words to that effect. He's made clear that he believes Daniel Dubois knocked down Anthony Joshua in sparring, and that Daniel Dubois can be the man to stop AJ's run in the pro ranks if the two meet in the professional ring. So, yeah, the hype machine is building around Daniel Dubois. You know, I did a video on Joyce and his fight against Ian Lewison, and I barely even referenced Dubois in that video, but half the comments were about him, people extremely excited, people telling me that, you know, Dubois could run through people already. So real excitement around Daniel Dubois, and you know, it's the kind of excitement you only see around fighters who tend to be British heavyweights with 100% KO ratios. So let's talk a bit more about this fight with Dorian Darch. But before we do that, just in brief, my thoughts on Daniel Dubois so far. In his 5 pro fights to date, and I've seen all 5, I may even have covered all 5 in videos in this channel, but of the 5 professional fights he's had so far, let me start by saying I have seen nothing negative in his game. Everything I've seen from Dubois has been positive. I can't tell you that he's looked slow. I can't tell you that he's looked hittable. I've seen literally no weaknesses in him. However, the test put in front of him in those 5 fights, he has sailed through with such consummate ease that we haven't actually learnt very much. We know he's a big guy. We know he's got quite good footwork for a big guy. We know he's got a good jab. He seems to be very heavy-handed. We know he seems to have very good timing and very good speed. He ticks a lot of the boxes. But he has sailed through that level of competition with such consummate ease. We've never really seen Dubois get out of first gear. And as such, there are so many unknowns with him. And these unknowns are commonplace when you're talking about heavyweight prospects. So, you know, this is to be expected. But we haven't seen Dubois get punched. We haven't seen Dubois have to fight 3 or 4 rounds and see what his stamina's like. We haven't seen Dubois tested stamina-wise. We haven't seen Dubois on the back foot. You know, all of these sort of open questions and question marks are there with Daniel Dubois, which is by no means a negative on Dubois. It's just a fact of the matter that they exist. You know, he's been matched against opponents who he's absolutely destroyed. And if you look at the opponents he's been in with, they're not terrible opponents. You know, he's already the Southern Area heavyweight champion. He's beaten Blaise Menduo, who was the first guy to take Lawrence Okoli the distance. And if I recall, Dubois got him out of there in a round or 2. He's beaten David Howe, who was a recent victim of David Allen. And he's beaten AJ Carter, who was, you know, Carter didn't have a good chin and he was there to be knocked out. But, you know, at one point Carter was considered a bit of a prospect in the heavyweight division. So, you know, don't get me mistaken here. Dubois has taken care of the, you know, the level of opposition he's been in with very handily, and looked very good in doing so. But the truth is, we still don't know too much about him. We'll learn his potential as a fighter, for me, when he starts having to go a few rounds, and when he starts fighting opposition that has the skill to ask questions of him. You know, we've seen enough from him already to say that he's, well, obviously his Southern Area heavyweight title. We've seen enough to make us believe he's certainly in the mix of the British title already. You know, you've seen enough to know that he'd be competitive with your Sextons, your Cornices, your Lewisons, your Dave Allens, etc. But is he got the capability to take the next step? For me, and you know, an open question at this point. He certainly looks like it, and he's come through the test real well. Now, where I think boxing fans get it wrong sometimes, and I appreciate that I am not with the majority here. My view represents the minority. So You know, maybe I'm just flat wrong, but where I think a lot of boxing fans get it wrong is I think the public consensus to Joe Joyce's debut against Ian Lewison has been on the whole a negative perception. They didn't like the fact that it took Joe Joyce so long to stop Ian Lewison. They didn't like the fact that at times that fight was a bit slower paced. They didn't like the fact that Joe Joyce maybe didn't seem to have the instant heavy-handed power of a Daniel Dubois and Anthony Joshua, and perhaps not the sort of immediate speed of one of those guys either. And I would agree that if we don't know boxing, and if we just look at two tapes, you know, if we look at Daniel Dubois versus AJ Carter and Joe Joyce versus Ian Lewison, what is the instant spectacle is certainly Dubois versus AJ Carter. You see this massive guy icing someone immediately, you know, the opponent not being able to have any answer, etc. But to me, I actually think the Ian Lewison win is more impressive. For a start, Ian Lewison represents a much higher level of opposition than anyone Dubois has been in with. Lewison was dispatched by Joe Joyce easier for me than when Dillian Whyte fought Ian Lewison, and Dillian Whyte's a fighter now, you know, certainly in the top 15 of the heavyweight division. Whilst Joe Joyce didn't appear devastating one-punch knockout artist against Ian Lewison, perhaps if Joe Joyce had fought Marcus Kelly, or perhaps if Joe Joyce had fought AJ Carter, he would have rattled through that level of opposition in a round. My point is, it's all reflective of the level of opponent you've been in with. Yeah, sure, Dubois taking care of business in, you know, a round or 2 rounds for all his fights. But if Joe Joyce had been in with those guys, maybe Joe Joyce would have got rid of opponents in a round as well and be known as a crazy one-punch knockout artist. You know, similarly, if Dubois had debuted against Ian Lewison, maybe it would have taken Dubois several rounds to get Lewison out of there. You know, it doesn't mean that one's a bigger puncher than the other at this stage. It just means that the level of opposition they're fighting is different. And again, that's to be expected. Joe Joyce, Olympic gold medalist, much older, much less time to waste than Daniel Dubois. So my thoughts on Dubois is a long-winded way of saying, I like what I see. We know he's got a lot, but I wouldn't rush him because there's still a lot of open questions, and I think a slow build is necessary. All this talk about him dropping Joshua, brilliant. Maybe it's true, I don't know. But, you know, I think he needs to be built correctly, and I think Frank knows that, and that's why we're seeing Dorian Darch in the ring. And yeah, for me, Darch he's a kind of area title level guy, probably below English title level. If we look at Darch's resume, he's actually a decent fighter at what I would call area level. He's certainly a fighter who comes up short anything higher than area level. You know, sometimes you get fighters who are comfortable at a certain level and very competitive at a certain level, but if you put them one level above that, you know, they're not able to compete. And I'd say Dorian Darch is one of those. So looking at him, 12 wins, only one of those wins by knockout, so not the biggest puncher in the world. 5 losses, 3 of those losses by KO, and 1 draw. So 18 fights, 12 wins, 5 losses and a draw. Let's talk about some of his notable fights. Starting with his most notable fight, I guess you could say, which was against Anthony Joshua. He fought Anthony Joshua in Joshua's 4th fight and lost by KO. He has also lost to the likes of Eddie Chambers, Ian Lewison, etc. So he's that kind of level of operator. In terms of notable wins, he beat Paul Butlin, took a loss to Hughie Fury. He's got a win over Tom Little, who I view as like an English title level fighter. A win over Larry Olabamo. Win over David Howe. Last time he got a draw against Dave D.L. Jones. So he was an 8-0 prospect. So, you know, he's shown he's come with some desire. He's not just gone into full opponent mode, Darch. You know, he's fought a guy who's 8-0. Yeah, probably expected to lose that fight, probably bought in as an opponent, and he's battled to a draw against a prospect. So he's still got some desire. He's still able to mix it. And, you know, some of that form, David Howe, Tom Little, Paul Butlin, yeah, some of that form isn't terrible. But as I say, he's a guy who comes up short at the at a level higher than sort of area 2 English title level. Now, before making this video, I've re-watched the Anthony Joshua Dorian Darch fight, and in terms of what Darch had against Joshua, I think that's relevant because Darch is a shorter heavyweight. He's listed at 6 foot, and he's going to face similar problems in facing Dubois as he found against Joshua. A much taller, more powerful, more athletic, younger guy. So what my key takeaway was from that Joshua fight is Darch didn't really have any education with regard to how he was going to get his work off against Joshua. Being frank, it looked like he'd entered the fight there to have a go, but without any real game plan. And what I mean by that is if you're a 6 foot guy and you're facing a 6'6" guy in Joshua, you can't just stand at the length of the opponent's arm. You can't just stand there in punching range of the opponent. What you've got to do is you've got to get on the back foot so you're out of the opponent's range. You've got to get on the front foot so you get inside the pocket and you close down the gap. What I thought Darch did is stood at the end of Anthony Joshua's punch and kind of lunged in. What I'm getting at is because he was a smaller heavyweight than Joshua, he didn't have the reach to connect with Joshua. But he was standing in a position where Joshua was able to catch him. And what he kind of resorted to was lunging in kind of wildly and really leaving himself open to getting caught crisply and cleanly by Joshua. In that fight, Joshua timed him very, very well and was able to connect on him on multiple occasions, really, as Darch lunged in quite recklessly. So that was my main takeaway from that. He didn't have some sort of footwork or foot speed to close down the gap. I've been watching a lot of Dubois recently. He didn't have what Dubois would refer to as ring coverage. He couldn't stand outside the pocket and lunge in. There wasn't that athleticism. It was more a case of standing in front of his opponent, not having the size to box, not having the speed to get on the inside, so just lunging and getting timed and getting countered. And for me, that approach is going to fare very, very, very badly against the Daniel Dubois because similar to AJ, Dubois appears to have that heavy-handed nature. He also, like AJ, appears to time opponents very, very well with long, straight punches. And I could just see, Dorian Darch happy to go out on his shield. Dorian Darch, really looking to have a go here. And I could see Dorian Darch flying in, looking to lunge, looking to connect with Dubois, being timed crisply, cleanly, and probably being stopped. It wouldn't surprise me if this is another Daniel Dubois knockout, in the first round or two. It's sensible matchmaking from Frank Warren. He's gradually, raising the level of opposition for Daniel Dubois. And, there are certain elements of form that suggest this is a decent fight. Dorian Darch's win over Tom Little. Tom Little probably slightly above area level. Maybe area level to English level, let's put it that way. Darch has mixed it with a higher level of competition. Joshua, Hughie Fury, Ian Lewis and Eddie Chambers. And, there's certain bits of form which suggest that Darch may be quite durable. I don't believe he was knocked out by Joshua. I think he was one of the few guys, he's stopped on his feet against Joshua, maybe not one of the few guys, but there you go. He went the distance with Hughie Fury, etc. So there's some form on Darch's resume that indicates, a level of, a level of durability. And fair play to Darch for taking this fight. Darch was offered the David Allen fight last week, and he didn't take that fight, and he's stepped up, and this is why he didn't take the fight, was because he had this one, obviously, and he's taken a fight against a guy who's considered a much more ferocious puncher than David Allen, certainly. So fair play to Darch for making the fight. It's a sensible but fairly low risk step up. In terms of the danger he poses to Daniel Dubois, for me it's minimal. He doesn't carry any power, only one win by knockout from 18 ring appearances. He's not got the size, the skill to box with Daniel Dubois. So it should be a routine victory for Daniel Dubois. A lot of the hardcore boxing fans like this journeyman Kamil Sokolovsky, who I think he beat let's type him into BoxRec actually. He's quite an interesting character, Kamil Sokolowski. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. So 4 wins, 11 losses, 2 draws. But the 4 wins come over Adam Makad, who was a 4-0 prospect, Nuruddin Medoun, who was 4-2, AJ Carter, and Sean Turner. So Sean Turner was an Irish heavyweight prospect who was 10-0. AJ Carter 8-2. He knocked out AJ Carter. So he's a kind of guy who's shown some real form, and he's been matched very tough. He's been in with Nathan Gorman, Dominic Akinlade, Gary Cornish, Sam Sexton, Casa Lee, Dillian White, Martin Bacoli, Tom Little. So he's only had 17 ring appearances, but really he's fought, if you like, the who's who of the English title level British boxing scene, and he's very, very durable. Of those 11 losses, he's only been stopped twice, and one of those was in his second fight against Dillian White. So maybe that's the kind of fight that would be a sensible step next for Daniel Dubois, because I do kind of believe that where Daniel Dubois is going to benefit, where he's going to get education and where he's going to improve and hone his skill set, is when he's tested over rounds. And maybe Dorian Darch can take him 2 or 3 rounds, maybe Kamil Sokolowski can take him 3 or 4 rounds, and then continuing to build him that way will hopefully put him in a position that when he is ready to fight for a British title or something of that nature, he'll have been tested over a few rounds, tested defensively, etc. So you don't want to be thrown straight into the fire. You want to be built slowly to that point. Okay, enough on Daniel Dubois. I think I've done this a few times on the channel recently, but I'm the only YouTuber who's dedicated 16.5 minutes to a pre-fight preview a month in advance of Daniel Dubois, Dorian Darch. But there you go. Let's talk briefly Anthony Yarde versus Nikolai Sjekloca. I've seen Sjekloca fight a few times actually. He's classed as a light heavyweight now. 32 wins, 11 by KO, so not the biggest knockout ratio. 4 losses and 1 draw. Most notably, he's never been stopped. And as you guys know, Yarde is known as a pretty ferocious power puncher. Yarde is known as a devastating knockout artist. So this should be a good test for Anthony Yarde. Sjekloca should certainly give him rounds, if nothing else. Looking at Sjekloca's resume, he's, if we're honest, best known for his defeats. He actually has a win over Hadillah Mohammadi, which is a good win. A loss by UD to Sakio Bika. A loss by UD to Arthur Abraham. A loss by UD to Callum Smith. A loss by UD to Tyrone Zoiga. Interestingly, he fought Robert Stieglitz last time out and drew, and that was for the EBU light heavyweight title. So, Stieglitz is a decent name. Appreciate he's probably in the autumn of his career, but that shows that Sjekloca is able to compete at a relative level. When he fought Callum Smith, I must admit I kind of thought he was not much more than a punching bag, a durable punching bag, but a punching bag who couldn't really offer very much offensively. I appreciate he's probably shown more form than that when he fought the likes of Abraham and Stieglitz. But, I don't think Yarde should get too many problems from him boxing-wise. He doesn't have huge power, and whenever I've seen him fight, he's been a slightly lower on ambition, and when he feels that he's down in a fight, he's happy to go into survival mode, which I suspect will be the case in this matchup. But just like I said with Daniel Dubois, if Yarde can get 10 rounds in here or something of that nature, that will really aid his development. It will give him experience, it will test his stamina, it will allow him to work on a few things, and he's going in against a guy here with 37 odd fights, who's mixed it against several guys who operate at world title level. So that experience absolutely vital for Anthony Yarde, and I do believe it's good matchmaking from Frank here, stepping him up at a good sort of level. That's my take. The Sjekloca fight for me, less interesting. I think it's sensible matchmaking. It's not a fight that I'm really buzzing for. Sjekloca's a 39-year-old guy fighting up at light heavyweight now, who loses whenever he steps up in level, as far as I'm concerned. But it is a step up from a pure form perspective. I guess I find it hard to see Sjekloca actually offering anything to trouble Anthony Yarde. I still see it as more of a showcase fight, so I can't say I'm buzzing for the fight as it is. But yeah, sensible matchmaking. As for the Dorian Darch fight, again, sensible matchmaking. I suspect Yarde wins the fight. Sorry, Dubois wins the fight in a round or two. I think if you look at that AJ fight, obviously AJ's the #1 heavyweight in the world. You don't expect Dorian Darch necessarily to cause him problems, but he looked really out of ideas, and I think he could be in a similar spot against Daniel Dubois. Anyway, 20 minutes on this video, more than enough. If you've enjoyed it, leave a comment, hit the thumbs up button, please press subscribe. As always, thanks for tuning in, guys.